The first 2 weeks after Margaret's funeral passed like a slow grey storm. Her absence wasn't just felt in the silences. It was in the way the light entered the house differently, the way the air seemed too still, as if waiting for someone who would never walk through the front door again. Before we continue, please subscribe my channel for such more stories, and let us know where you are listening in the comments. On a chilly Thursday morning, I stood alone in my kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The steam had vanished, leaving only the faint scent of roasted beans clinging to the air. The cup itself was chipped along the handle, a Father's Day gift from my granddaughter Sophie, nearly a decade ago. It felt heavier than it should, as if even porcelain had learned to carry the weight of grief. The phone rang, its sharp tone slicing through the stillness. I knew who it would be before I even picked it up. "Dad, we need to talk about the house," my son, Daniel, said without preamble. His voice carried that same restrained impatience I'd recognized since his teenage years, except now, at 38, it was colder, more practiced. I set the mug down without drinking. "Good morning to you too, Daniel. Let's not play games," he replied. "This place is too big for you to live in alone. The taxes, the upkeep, it's just not realistic. We've already found a buyer." "There's no mortgage," I said, my tone flat and factual. Margaret and I had paid the place off 6 years ago, but I had never mentioned that to the kids. They assumed there was debt, and I let them assume. It had always seemed easier that way. There was a pause, then a short laugh, sharp and dismissive, the kind that was meant to cut. "Dad, come on. Mom's pension barely covered her prescriptions. We all know you're under strain." I turned toward the window above the sink. Outside, the winter garden waited in quiet defiance. The rosemary bushes bent slightly over the stone path, the lemon tree in need of pruning. Margaret and I had tended this garden for 25 years, each plant carrying its own memory. Now it all felt like a private museum of the life we'd built together. "You're worried about me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm worried about what's practical," he said. "Laura's got Sophie's tuition to think about. We could put the money from the sale to good use." The words landed heavily. I could picture him at his dining table, laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing in the dim light, columns labeled in neat, detached language. Dad's house sale, price, proceeds, split. I had taught him about numbers when he was 8 years old, showing him how to calculate change for the ice cream truck. Now, he was calculating me. "You've been planning this for a while," I said quietly. "That's called being responsible," he countered. "We can't just sit around until something happens to you." I let the sentence hang there, ugly and unpolished. "Until something happens to you. Thanks for your concern," I said, my voice as flat as the shadow of the lemon tree across the garden path. "I'll think about it." Before he could push further, I ended the call. The house fell into silence again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the stillness of morning, but the pause before the next blow. I poured the cold coffee down the drain, the scent of rosemary rising faintly from my hands, just as it had when Margaret used to pass me sprigs for the Sunday roast. The phone rang again. This time it was my daughter, Laura. Her voice carried a brightness that didn't belong, the kind of tone people use when they're trying to make bad news sound like an opportunity. "Dad, I just talked to Daniel. We're on the same page. You could move in here with us. We've got the finished basement, a full bath, and we could add a kitchenette. Your own space." "Perfect," I said, though the word felt far too big for a set of walls below ground. "And the money from selling the house?" "Well, after we cover the contractor's costs for the basement, you could set some aside, maybe help with Sophie's tuition. And Daniel's looking into a new place for his family." Her pitch was smooth, but I could hear the rehearsed cadence, the shared script between her and Daniel. They had already decided on an ending before even asking if I wanted to read the story. "Laura," I asked, "when was the last time you called me to talk about something other than money?" "That's not fair," she said quickly. "It's been 2 months, I replied. "And yes, I've been sending Sophie $500 every month for the last 2 years. She hesitated. "She doesn't need to know that." "Of course not," If Sophie knew, she might start questioning the stories she'd been told about her grandfather, the fragile old man who couldn't manage his own affairs. "I need to go," I said. And this time, I hung up before the conversation could twist into something uglier. For a while, I just stood in the hallway. The late morning light caught on the dust along the console table. Margaret's reading glasses still lay folded neatly on top of a paperback she'd never finish. I reached out to touch them, then stopped. That was a step I wasn't ready for. Instead, my feet carried me to her study. The air inside still held the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle floral note, mixed with the lemon oil she used on the desk. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Pen resting across a yellow legal pad, an envelope corner peeking out from under a stack of papers. When I pulled open the bottom drawer, stiff from years of sticking, my fingers found a pale blue folder. On its cover, in Margaret's tidy block handwriting, was a note. "If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside." And in that moment, for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than loss. I sat in Margaret's chair before opening the folder, letting the leather warm beneath my shoulders. The house was quiet enough to hear the hall clock. I thought about shutting the drawer and pretending I hadn't seen the note, but grief pushes you toward truths you'd rather avoid. I lifted the cover. Inside were layers, bank statements from institutions I'd never heard Margaret mention, small balances spread like seeds. Nothing flashy, just deliberate. Beneath them, insurance documents, one tagged with a yellow note. "For Sophie, keep quiet." Under the papers lay a thin envelope with my name in her block letters. I slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded a 2-page letter, dated almost 2 years ago. Her voice rose off the page. "Richard," she wrote, "if you found this, I'm gone, and the calls have already started. Daniel and Laura are good at convincing themselves that what they want is what you need. They will circle you kindly. Do not mistake kindness for permission. The house is yours. It should remain yours, unless you choose otherwise for your reasons, not theirs. I set aside some things they don't know about. If you need space, there is another place, a small cottage by the ocean, across the water. I bought it in my name, to keep the noise away from you. Trust the woman named Anna. There's a key." Behind the letter was a typed contact sheet for a Lisbon law office, a caretaker listed as Ana Duarte, and taped to the back, a brass key on blue ribbon. In Margaret's square hand, "If you go, go on your terms. If you stay, stay on your feet." My pulse sped. Outside, the rosemary bent and returned in the wind. I wanted to call Daniel and say nothing would be sold. I wanted to ask Laura when talk turned into budgets. Instead, I pulled a legal pad and drew 3 columns. What they know, what they don't, what I intend. What they know, I'm alone, and they assume I'm tired of this house. What they don't, there is no mortgage, and I am more myself with a wrench in my hand than I'll ever be in a basement with a borrowed window. What I intend, hold the ground calmly, move my pieces quietly. I called Peter Myers, the estate's lawyer, who once guided us through Margaret's aunt's affairs. He wasn't warm, he was reliable. "Richard," he said when his receptionist put me through, "I'm sorry about Margaret. Come in this afternoon. Bring whatever she left." Before I left, I locked the folder in my desk, not her drawer, mine, and walked the house once. I straightened Sophie's photo in the hall, washed the cold cup, and set it upside down to dry. Peter's office was in a former bank. The old vault door still stood in the lobby. He met me with a nod. At the conference table, I placed the folder between us, opened to the deed recorded 6 years ago, with only my name on it. "Margaret insisted," I said, and my throat tightened. He read quickly. "Clean," he said. "No liens, no encumbrances. Anyone trying to list this without your signature is selling air." He slid over a letter. "Will notify the county and any agents that no one is authorized to act for you. Future communications in writing, no visits." I told him about the calls. Daniel's tone made sons sound like supervisors and fathers feel like employees. Peter listened. "If they threaten guardianship," he said, "we answer with evaluations and recordings. Competency is not a debate they should want. And the other property." I gave him the summary, A small ocean cottage in Portugal, title in Margaret's name, contacts waiting, a caretaker who owed her a debt. I set the key on the table. Peter didn't smile, but his eyebrows lifted. We'll coordinate with Portugal. Establish spousal rights, and if you want it discreet, place it into a trust with a quiet name. Mail routes through my office. He touched the key with the pen's back. Don't lose this. Walking out, I felt taller. Some weights don't disappear, they settle where they belong. At home I checked the study lock, made a sandwich I didn't taste, and reopened the folder. The papers now looked like tools. A text from Laura, "We'll come by Saturday to talk. We'll bring Sophie," the phrasing told on her. Bring Sophie, as if I were being invited to my own home. I typed, "See you at 9, and sent it. You don't win by refusing the meeting. You win by choosing the hour. I walked the garden. Winter spares nothing, and what survives earns it. Rosemary was bruised and bright, the lemon tree held hard fruit. Margaret used to say, "A life is a collection of chores you decide to love." I carried the scent inside. That night I slept on her study couch, the clock measuring a rhythm my nerves couldn't find alone. I woke before dawn, with a sentence I didn't remember writing. "I am not moving." I said it out loud, and it sounded like someone I recognized. Morning brought a low sky, and the kind of cold that makes coffee matter. I brewed fresh coffee, then printed 3 copies of the deed, and Peter's letter. One went in the safe behind the bookcase, one under the tray of silverware, one under the driver's manual, in the glove compartment. Paranoia? Maybe, or just housekeeping for a future I mean to meet on my feet. I dialed the Lisbon number. A woman answered on the second ring, her English lined with warmer music. "Anna speaking. My name is Richard Cole, my wife was Margaret." Silence softened. "Then I have been waiting for you," she said. "The house is ready. I will air the rooms and put lemons in a bowl. You must rest." "I won't be long," I said. "There are a few things to settle first." "Of course," she replied. "Portugal waits well." After the call, sunlight touched the frost. Daniel called, then Laura. I didn't answer. Instead I wrote a short list on the back of Margaret's letter, beneath her last line. "If you stay, stay on your feet." Saturday came with a winter sun so pale, it barely touched the frost on the lawn. I'd been up since 6, walking the garden paths in my coat, feeling the crunch under my boots. The rosemary I'd trimmed earlier in the week gave off a faint scent when I brushed past it, the same scent that lingered in Margaret's hands after she worked there. By 8:30, the kettle was on. I didn't fuss over the house for their sake. I kept to my own rhythm because that was the point. When you prepare for a meeting like this, you don't change your tempo, you make them step into yours. At exactly 9:03, the sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Through the kitchen window, I saw Daniel's black SUV roll in, its polished paint catching what little light the sky offered. Laura sat in the passenger seat, phone in hand, eyes already scanning. Sophie was in the back, her forehead against the glass. I opened the front door before they could knock. Sophie was the first one up the steps. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, wrapping her arms around my waist. Her hair smelled faintly of strawberry shampoo, the kind Margaret used to buy for her without being asked. "Hey, kiddo," I said, holding her longer than necessary. "Come inside. It's warmer here." Daniel and Laura followed, bringing with them the scent of cold air and expensive perfume. He didn't take off his sunglasses until we were in the kitchen. "You've been busy," Daniel remarked, scanning the room. "I keep busy," I replied, pouring tea into the heavy mugs Margaret favored. We sat at the table. Sophie drifted into the living room to look through the stack of books I'd left out for her. Daniel cleared his throat, the signal he'd decided to lead. "Dad, let's get to it. We found a buyer. Solid offer. More than this place is worth, honestly. It's a chance for you to downsize, avoid taxes, and get rid of the maintenance." I stirred my tea slowly, letting the spoon ring against the ceramic. "There's no mortgage. The taxes are manageable." "That's not the point," Laura said, leaning forward. "It's about practicality. You don't need all this space." I looked at each of them in turn. "Practicality for me, or for you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You think we're doing this for ourselves?" I didn't answer directly. Silence can be its own kind of mirror. They let it hang for a moment. but Daniel couldn't help filling it. It's just, we have plans. If you were closer, we could help you, and it would free up. He stopped himself. Free up what? I asked. Laura jumped in. We could help you find something manageable, near us, close to Sophie. What if I'm comfortable here? I asked. That's not sustainable, Daniel said. Sharper now. I set my cup down carefully. Do you remember the summer you were 12, Daniel? The roof leaked over the east bedroom. You and I spent 2 weeks fixing it together. You learned how to lay shingles. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said. Because this house isn't just walls. It's work I'm still capable of doing. Laura rolled her eyes slightly. Dad, you're almost 70. You shouldn't have to. And yet I said evenly, I can. I didn't tell them about the blue folder, the deed, or Portugal. Not yet. Sophie wandered back in, holding a drawing she'd made with colored pencils. I drew your garden, she said, handing it to me. Bright green rosemary bushes, a yellow lemon tree, and in the corner, a small blue house, Margaret's study. She'd even drawn the curtains. It's perfect, I told her. You remembered the color of Grandma's curtains. Of course, Grandma said to always draw what's true. Sophie replied. Daniel shifted in his seat. Why don't you go play in the den, Soph? She skipped off. When she was gone, I leaned back. Here's the thing, Margaret wanted me here. She made sure I could stay. Paid it off years ago. Laura blinked. Paid it off? I nodded. 6 years ago. Quietly. She didn't want to be hounded about it. Daniel's mouth pressed into a thin line. Why didn't you say that before? I didn't think I needed to, I said. It was just enough truth to tilt the floor beneath them, without revealing how deep the foundation went. They stayed another half hour, trying to steer the conversation back to the plan. I kept my tone light. Asked about Sophie's school, Laura's job, Daniel's golf game. Each answer was shorter than the last. When they stood to leave, Daniel said, Just think about it, Dad. The buyer won't wait forever. I'll think about it, I replied, walking them to the door. Sophie hugged me again. Bye, Grandpa. I'll come back soon. Anytime, kiddo, I said, and meant it. After the SUV rolled away, I stood in the doorway, letting the cold air settle on my face. Inside, the house was silent again, but not empty. In Margaret's study, I opened the blue folder and looked at the photograph of her, with Sophie in the garden. Both smiling, both with dirt under their nails. On the back, in Margaret's handwriting, teach her how to keep what matters. I knew then the fight wasn't just about the house. It was about teaching the next generation not to hand over what's worth holding. And the lesson, I decided, would be one they wouldn't see coming. Monday morning arrived with the smell of strong coffee and the slow creak of the front gate in the wind. I'd slept less than 5 hours, not from worry but from thinking through the shape of the next few weeks. In chess, you don't rush the board. You position quietly until one move forces your opponent to play your game. By 7, I was at my desk with the blue folder open, the legal envelope beside it, and Margaret's old fountain pen in hand. The deed for the second property, the one no one knew about, lay flat against the desk. Its clean ink and official stamp seemed to hum with possibility. I called Peter, my lawyer, before the rest of the town was even awake. We need to arrange a transfer. Quietly, I told him. You want to sell? He asked. No, I said. I want to secure it, in a way that makes it untouchable. He paused long enough for me to hear him adjusting in his chair. We can set up a trust, one that benefits someone specific, keeps it out of reach. That's the idea, I replied. And I know exactly who that someone is. Sophie's face came to mind, her gap-toothed smile when she was younger, the way she leaned in when you told her a story. She'd be the one to inherit this piece of Margaret's legacy, without her parents being able to slice it into their plans. Peter agreed to meet the next day to start the paperwork. I hung up feeling that quiet satisfaction of a lock sliding into place. The rest of the day, I worked in the garden, trimming the rosemary, raking the lemon leaves that had fallen overnight. Physical work steadies the mind. Every rake stroke, every clipped branch, was part of preparing myself, and the house, for what I knew was coming. By mid-afternoon, Daniel's name lit up my phone. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey Dad, so, I talked to the buyer again. They're willing to sweeten the deal. Closing in 3 weeks. That's fast, but I'm not interested, I said. Simply, you didn't even hear the number. I don't need to. This isn't about numbers. Silence, then a sharp exhale. You're being stubborn. You don't have to. Daniel, I said, keeping my tone even. There's nothing to discuss. The house stays. He muttered something under his breath before hanging up. I smiled faintly. The less they thought I was doing, the more I could actually do. That evening, I pulled down an old wooden box from the top shelf of Margaret's study. Inside were the letters we'd exchanged during my short work stints overseas, photographs from the early years in the house, and a single sheet of paper that made me pause. It was a handwritten list in Margaret's looping script. If anything happens to me, the list detailed her wishes, not just for the property, but for Sophie's upbringing, her education, and her inheritance. It was dated 5 years ago, notarized, and signed, and it was more binding than Daniel or Laura could imagine. I decided then, I wouldn't just defend what was ours. I would teach them that greed comes with a cost, one they'd pay in full. Before bed, I called a local contractor I trusted. I need you to come by this week, I said. There's work to be done, and I want it started before the holidays. Repairs, he asked. Upgrades, I replied. Because nothing sends a clearer message to circling vultures than showing them the house thereafter is not falling apart. It's getting stronger. The contractor arrived early Thursday morning, his truck rumbling up the gravel drive before the sun cleared the ridge. Hank had been in the business for 30 years, the kind of man who measured twice, cut once, and didn't waste words. He stepped out with his clipboard and a thermos, giving the house a slow, appraising look before we shook hands. You weren't kidding, he said, eyeing the roofline. Structurally solid. Just needs someone who cares to keep it that way. That's exactly the plan, I told him. By mid-morning, his crew was moving like clockwork, replacing worn shutters, sanding the porch railings, and starting the first coats of deep, weather-resistant paint. The place was waking up, each brush stroke making it more of a fortress and less of a target. I didn't bother telling Daniel or Laura. I wanted them to see it with their own eyes, the way you might leave a chess piece in plain view to make your opponent wonder if it's bait. Late that afternoon, I heard tires crunching on the drive. Through the kitchen window, I saw Laura's SUV pull up, Daniel in the passenger seat. They both stepped out, their faces tightening as they spotted Hank's men working on the porch. Laura didn't bother with small talk when she came through the door. What's going on here? Maintenance, I said, stirring sugar into my coffee. This looks like more than maintenance. Daniel cut in. New paint, new fixtures. Are you planning to put this place on the market without telling us? I let out a quiet laugh. That's not how this works. Laura folded her arms. We've been trying to help you, Dad. If you'd just agree to sell. I set my cup down harder than I intended, the ceramic clicking against the saucer. Selling this house was never part of your mother's wishes. You two keep talking like you're protecting me. But this isn't about me, is it? It's about what you want. Daniel opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Don't answer. I already know. For a long moment, the only sound was the hammering outside. Then Laura's eyes flicked to the stack of folders on my desk. What are those? Old tax records. I lied without hesitation. Nothing you need to worry about. They didn't believe me. I could see it in the way Daniel's gaze lingered, his jaw working, but they also didn't press, and that told me they were planning to do their own digging. Fine, let them dig. They wouldn't find the lock I'd put on the second property. As they left, Daniel tried one last time. It's not too late to make this easy, Dad. I gave him a faint smile. I prefer the harder road, son. Builds character. After they drove off, Hank stepped inside to discuss the next phase of work. You want me to start on the security upgrades next week? Yes, I said. And make them subtle. I want this place to look welcoming from the street, but impossible to get past without an invitation. That night, I sat in Margaret's study again, her handwritten list open in front of me. I traced the ink with my finger, the words steadying me. Everything I was doing now wasn't just for me. It was for Sophie. to make sure when the time came, she'd inherit something worth more than money. She'd inherit proof that her grandfather had fought to protect what mattered. And Daniel and Laura, they'd learn the truth the hard way, when the locks clicked behind them, and they realized the door wasn't opening again. By Tuesday, the house smelled like fresh lumber and simmering lemon peels. Hank's crew had packed up, and the porch rails shone with a stubborn kind of newness. I spent the morning at the kitchen table sorting papers into neat stacks that looked ordinary from a distance and decisive up close. The deed Peter had copied for me, his cease and desist letters, and a short list in my block handwriting labeled simply, "Next." At 10:11 the bell rang. Through the peephole stood a man in a sport coat with an agent's smile, and another behind him holding a leather folio. I opened the door only as far as the chain. "Mr. Cole?" the first one beamed. "Greg Hawthorne, Hawthorne Realty. We're here to—" "No, you're not," I said. "Any business regarding this address goes through my attorney." He tried to slide a paper through the gap, but I let the chain hold. "Your son indicated." "My son indicated nothing on my behalf," I said. The older man cleared his throat. "We're simply checking on your well-being. You can check from there." I let the door close the last inch and watched their reflections in the glass as they retreated to the steps to confer in low, aggrieved voices. I set my phone on the counter and tapped record, then called Peter. He picked up on the second ring. "Visitors?" he asked, as if he'd been timing the day with me. "Realty plus, a +1, I said. "They referenced my son." "Good," he replied, meaning the word in its legal way. "Forward, any audio. I'll file notice with the county and send certified letters to the brokerage and the mystery companion. From now on, everything is in writing, and no one claims confusion later." When the mail came, I drove to the post office and rented a medium P.O. box in a number sequence I liked for its lack of poetry. The clerk slid 2 keys under the partition. "Anything else?" "A sheet of change of address forms," I said, then added, "and an extra roll of those green certified stickers. There's a comfort in paper that leaves a trail." Back home, I called the credit bureaus and set freezes, then placed the confirmations under a magnet on the fridge, where only I would look. After lunch I phoned the Lisbon number again. Anna's voice arrived warm and practical. "The shutters are painted," she said, as if we were living the same day on different continents. "The house will be ready whenever you are." "I'm not far," I said. "There are a few conversations left to finish." "Then finish them," she answered. "I will put fresh linens anyway. Hope likes ready rooms." At 3:07 Daniel called. I let the first ring run long enough to feel honest, then answered. "Dad, Greg says you threatened him." "I promised him attorneys," I said. "Different verb." "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "We're trying to help you, but if you keep making irrational choices—" "Be careful," I said, even and low. "You're leaving the country of concern and entering the province of accusation." He exhaled in a way that made the line hiss. "Maybe we should be talking about guardianship." "I record my calls now," I replied. "Say that slower if you mean it." There was a long quiet, and then the boy he used to be surfaced in the shape of his next sentence. "What do you want, Dad?" "A meeting," I said. "Thursday, 2 o'clock, here. Bring whomever you like. I'll have Peter. We will talk like adults or not at all." He didn't agree so much as run out of places to object. "Fine." When I hung up, I walked next door and found Joyce on her porch with a paperback. She put a finger in the book and looked up the way neighbors used to before front doors became passwords. "Need a witness Thursday?" she asked, as if she'd been listening to the weather, not the street. "Only to the time the cars arrive and the time they leave," I said. "Write it down for yourself." "I can do that," she said, "and I make a mean pot of coffee if anyone starts pretending they're too important to wait their turn." That night, I oiled the front door hinges and changed the deadbolt, not because I was afraid, but because I liked the click that answers to my key alone. I laid out a clean shirt and a legal pad with the date already written at the top. Under it I tucked a single sheet in an envelope addressed to Sophie, with a note in my hand. "Some doors you keep shut because people will take. Some you keep shut so you remember what's worth opening for." It wasn't for Thursday, it was for Sunday. Wednesday was for making the trap look like a living room. I set the kitchen table with 4 heavy mugs, the ones Margaret liked because they made guests slow down and placed Peter's letters in a neat stack at my end of the wood. I copied the deed one more time and slid a spare into the piano bench, partly habit, partly humor. The porch I swept, not because anyone deserved the courtesy, but because I prefer stepping into order. Peter arrived early Thursday, which is to say on time. He placed a thin folder beside my mug, a pale green tab marked Cole, real property in tidy caps. "We are not performing," he said, before I could joke that we needed programs. "We are informing." The SUV rolled in at 1:59 with another car behind it, Daniel at the wheel, Laura stiff at his side, and a man with a partner's haircut, stepping out of the sedan, carrying a leather briefcase that had met more tables than hands. We didn't do greetings. Everyone took their seats like pieces settling into squares. The partner introduced himself as Jeff. He began with the reasonable cadence men use when they think they own the room's temperature. "We're here in good faith," he said, "to find a path that honors everyone's interests." Peter slid his top letter across the table. "My client's interests are honored when his ownership is respected," he said. "He has not listed his home or authorized anyone to solicit buyers. Further efforts will be treated as tortious interference. This notice is filed with the county." Jeff's expression didn't change. That was the trick. "Surely we can discuss alternatives." "We can discuss boundaries," Peter replied. "Alternatives are what people ask for after they ignore them." Daniel leaned in, palms splayed like he was studying a map. "Look, keep the house if you're going to be dramatic about it, but you can't expect us to carry everything else forever." "Carry?" I asked. "What are you carrying, son? My mortgage that doesn't exist, my bills you don't pay, or the disappointment that your math stopped working when I said no?" Color rose along his collar. Laura tried for softness and landed on brittle. "Dad, please, we're just worried." "Then worry about my calendar," I said. "Sunday pie, call me then to talk about the garden." The house is no longer a topic. Jeff cleared his throat, changing tack. "We also need to address the possibility of conservatorship should." "Should what?" Peter said, quick and quiet. "My client has passed a same-day competency evaluation, which I will file if pushed. He recalls dates, balances, and rates most people outsource to their phones. If you petition, we will enter these recorded threats into the record. Choose carefully what you intend to own under oath." Silence did its job. In it, I could hear Joyce's pen scratching the tines on her porch ledger. I let my hand rest on the table, palm open. "Since we're exchanging expectations, here are mine." I slid a single page across to my children, 3 lines written in the same neat block that used to label their school lunch bags. "I am not selling my home. If I relocate, you will learn after the decision is final. I will support Sophie directly at my discretion. Intermediaries end that support." Laura read twice, eyes bright. Daniel folded the page once like a man who doesn't trust paper to keep its shape. Jeff closed his briefcase, as if that were a kind of agreement. "I think we're done here," he said. "For now," Peter answered. They were 3 minutes gone, when my phone buzzed with a Lisbon country code. I stepped into the study and closed the door. "Senhor Cole," a careful voice said, "documents confirming your status for the seaside property are ready. We can courier to your post box today. There is also an authorization for the caretaker to act on your instruction." "Send them," I said. "Thank you." When I hung up, I placed my palm on the blue folder and felt for the first time in weeks, not the ache of what I'd lost, but the weight of what I still held. I called a moving company just before closing. 2 deliveries tomorrow morning, I said. 1 to my son, 1 to my daughter. Boxes are labeled. Please request a signature and timestamp a photo if they refuse. "What are we delivering?" the dispatcher asked. "Things that already belong to them," I said. "And 1 note each." Sometimes revenge sounds like paper sliding across a table. Sometimes it looks like a door that opens only from your side. Tomorrow it would look like a truck at dawn, and the past arriving where it should have been living all along. Friday began, before the sun had found the edge of the blinds. The air outside was cool enough to taste, sharp with the scent of early dew and distant lawn clippings. I'd barely finished my first mug of coffee when the moving truck rumbled into the driveway, its white sides catching the faint glow from the street lamp, like a blank page about to be written on. 2 movers stepped out. Both young, the kind of strong that still carries politeness. One wore a cap pulled low, the other had the look of someone who'd seen stranger requests than mine, but never at this hour. "You're Mr. Cole?" the taller one asked. "That's me," I said, handing over the clipboard I'd already signed. 2 separate stops, labels on each box, signatures required upon delivery, photos, if they refuse. He glanced toward the open garage where my neatly stacked packages waited. "Got it. What's in 'em?" "Memories that weigh more than they look," I replied, not offering details. The first pile, marked for Daniel, held tools from Margaret's father's workbench, oiled and wrapped in cloth, every wrench and chisel in the order she'd kept them. Alongside, I'd included framed photographs of his childhood birthdays, the kind where cake frosting ended up on his chin, and Joy hadn't yet learned the language of demands. Beneath it all sat a small wooden box containing the watch I'd planned to give him when he turned 40. The note on top read, "Some legacies aren't for sale." The second pile, marked for Laura, was lighter but sharper in its meaning. Margaret's jewelry box sat at the center, the kind with a faded velvet lining and a little brass key that still turned stiff in the lock. Around it were recipes in Margaret's handwriting, pages worn at the corners from decades of use. Tucked among them was a faded snapshot of Laura, as a toddler, asleep on her mother's lap. My note for her said simply, "Keep what reminds you of the right kind of wealth." By the time the movers loaded the last box, the first hints of sunrise painted the sky in muted peach and lavender. I handed the cap-wearing one a folded bill for coffee and breakfast. "If they don't open the door, leave it on the porch. Take the photo and timestamp it," I said. "But I think they'll answer. Curiosity is hard to resist." They nodded, professional enough not to pry. Inside, I called Peter. He answered before the first ring had finished. "They're on their way," I told him. "Perfect," he said. "Did you send the letters too?" "They're in the top box of each delivery. Certified mail will go out later this morning." An hour later, my phone buzzed with the first confirmation photo. Daniel standing on his porch in a robe, hair tousled, staring at the stack of boxes like they might explode. His signature, scribbled in impatience, was barely legible. Minutes after, a second image arrived. Laura in a silk dressing gown, hand over her mouth, the jewelry box cradled awkwardly in the crook of her arm, as if she couldn't decide whether to hold it or drop it. Both timestamps were before 7:30 a.m. I saved the photos into a folder on my desktop titled Delivered. Then I took a deep breath and let the quiet of the house wrap around me. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask for company, the kind you earn after weeks of guarding your ground. By mid-morning, the Lisbon courier called to confirm my property documents were en route to my P.O. box. "You'll have them within 48 hours, he said. The way he pronounced my name, careful, respectful, reminded me that there were places where my story didn't begin and end with betrayal. Before lunch, Joyce tapped on the back door with 2 slices of warm banana bread wrapped in foil. "Saw the truck this morning," she said, setting them on the counter. "Looked like someone was finally getting what's theirs." "Something like that," I said, with a smile. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, documents spread before me, pen in hand. I wasn't just preparing for the next step, I was writing the ending. The kind where revenge didn't need shouting or spectacle, only precision and patience. When the phone rang again, it was neither Daniel nor Laura. It was Anna from Lisbon, her voice carrying the sound of ocean wind in the background. "Already here," she said. "Your room, your view, your life, waiting." "Good," I replied, "because I think I'm just about done here." The trap had sprung, the message delivered, and the balance quietly restored. Now it was only a matter of deciding when to walk away, and how much of the silence I'd take with me. The letter came on a Tuesday, tucked among the usual stack of bills and grocery flyers. Thick paper, expensive ink, my name written in Daniel's tidy print, the same way he used to sign birthday cards when he was still young enough to mean the words inside. Inside, a single sheet read, "Dad, let's put this nonsense behind us. Come to dinner at my place this Saturday. Just us, Laura, and a chance to talk like family again." Beneath that, in smaller handwriting, no lawyers, no surprises. It should have felt like an olive branch. Instead, It read like bait. I left the letter on the counter and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. By the time the steam rose from my mug, I'd already decided to go, but on my terms. Saturday arrived with a steady drizzle, the kind that slicks the pavement and softens the air. I dressed in a dark blazer and clean-pressed shirt, the same quiet uniform I'd worn to Margaret's memorial. Not flashy, but deliberate. In my inside pocket was a small envelope, my own addition to the evening. When I pulled into Daniel's driveway, I noticed a new luxury SUV parked beside Laura's sedan. Through the bay window, the glow of the chandelier spilled across the dining table, set with more silverware than any casual dinner would require. Daniel opened the door before I could knock. "Dad," he said, with a practiced warmth that felt as staged as the table setting. "Glad you came." Laura appeared behind him, her smile tight, eyes darting briefly to the envelope in my pocket, before settling on my face. "We've made roast lamb. Your favorite." Inside, the smell was rich, almost cloying, and the air held that same subtle tension a courtroom has before the judge enters. I took my seat at the end of the table, not the head, but far enough from the center to watch both of them clearly. Dinner began with polite conversation about weather, neighborhood gossip, and mutual acquaintances I barely remembered. Then, midway through the main course, Daniel set down his fork and leaned forward. "Dad," he began, "Laura and I, we've been talking. We think it's time to settle everything. The house, the accounts, the other matters." Laura folded her hands. "It's just not healthy to keep these things hanging over us. We could help you with the upkeep, manage the property, even make sure Sophie benefits when the time comes." Her voice was honey, but the aftertaste was vinegar. I sipped my wine, letting the silence stretch until Daniel's foot started tapping under the table. Finally, I placed my napkin on the plate and pulled the envelope from my pocket. "I thought you might say something like that," I said, sliding it toward them. Daniel hesitated before picking it up, tearing it open with a single motion. Inside was a copy of the Lisbon property deed, my name etched in black ink beside a bold stamp of ownership. Beneath it, a letter from my lawyer confirming the property was in a secure trust, with Sophie as the sole beneficiary. Daniel's jaw tightened. Laura's eyes flickered between the paper and my face. I kept quiet because I knew how this would go. I said evenly, "You've been circling what you thought was the prize, all the while missing the real one. That house, it's never going to be yours. And this," I tapped the deed with my finger, "is already far from your reach." The only sound was the steady tick of the dining room clock. I stood, adjusting my blazer. "Thank you for dinner. The lamb was fine, but I think this is where our business ends." Without another word, I walked out into the drizzle, the cool rain washing away the stale air of that room. Behind me, the muffled sound of raised voices leaked through the closed door. The streetlights cast long shadows across the wet pavement as I reached my car. For the first time in months, the weight in my chest eased, not because the fight was over, but because I knew I'd already won. The phone started ringing before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. The screen lit up with Daniel's name, but I let it buzz until it went silent. 30 seconds later, it lit up again. This time, Laura, I didn't answer that either. By the third attempt, I switched the phone to silent and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth after last night's drizzle. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower coughed to life. But here it was still, peaceful. When I came back inside, there were already 4 voicemails waiting. I poured a second cup of coffee before listening. The first was Daniel, voice tight, trying for calm, but with an edge he couldn't hide. "Dad, we need to talk. I think you're making a mistake, and look, we can work something out." The second was Laura, sugar melting into steel halfway through. "This isn't fair, and you know it. Margaret would never have wanted things to be this way." The third was Daniel again, shorter, sharper. "You're going to regret this." The fourth was silence, just breathing, faint but deliberate, before the click of disconnection. I deleted them all. By mid-morning, Joyce came over with a grocery bag in one arm, and that same sharp glint in her eyes. "Ran into Laura at the store," she said, setting down the bag. "She looked like someone had taken her crown. Told me you'd blindsided them." I smiled faintly. Guess I did. Joyce unpacked bread, eggs, and a jar of peach preserves. You're not worried they'll try something? Oh, they'll try, I said. That's who they are. But I'm not in their shadow anymore. The rest of the day passed in a quiet rhythm. I sorted through old photo albums, boxing up a few to send to Sophie. There was comfort in handling the past on my own terms, deciding which memories deserved to be carried forward and which could be left behind. Late in the afternoon, Peter called. They've been sniffing around, he said, without preamble. Daniel's already called a real estate contact about the house. Thought you should know. Let him sniff, I replied. The house isn't going anywhere, unless I decide it will. Peter chuckled. You've got them cornered. Just don't be surprised if they start playing dirtier. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a map of Lisbon spread out before me. My finger traced the streets near the waterfront, pausing over a row of buildings painted in warm colors, the kind that caught the sun and held it. I could see it clearly, a quiet balcony, the sound of waves, mornings without the weight of old battles. As the clock neared midnight, I locked the house and stood for a long moment in the darkened living room. The air felt different now, lighter, as if the walls themselves knew a chapter was closing. Whatever Daniel and Laura planned next, they'd be chasing a shadow. The real prize was already far beyond their reach, waiting across the ocean. And I intended to get there on my own terms. It started with small ripples. 2 days after the dinner, I noticed a strange car parked across the street. A dark sedan, windows tinted too heavily for our quiet neighborhood. The driver didn't get out, didn't look up, just sat there with the engine idling for hours. By evening it was gone, but I'd already memorized the plates. The next day, a manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in block letters. Inside were photocopies of my late wife Margaret's old financial records, mortgages paid, accounts opened and closed, even grocery receipts from years back. Tucked between the pages was a note. You've got nothing without her. Think about it. I burned the note in the sink. That afternoon, Peter called again. Daniel's been making noise at the country club, dropping hints about you not being fit to manage property. Said you might be slipping. Slipping? I laughed without humor. He's really reaching now. He's not just talking, Peter said. I hear he's got a lawyer drafting something, trying to challenge the trust. I leaned back in my chair, letting his words settle. This was the part where most people would panic, but I'd been expecting it. Men like Daniel and women like Laura didn't back down when they lost. They doubled down. That night, Joyce stopped by with her usual blunt delivery. You're not going to like this, she said. I overheard Laura telling someone at the salon that you're well lonely, that maybe you shouldn't be living alone anymore. They're setting the stage for something. I poured her a cup of tea. Let them set it. I've been building my own stage for months. On my desk upstairs sat a black folder with every relevant document, the deed, the trust paperwork, correspondence with my Lisbon contact. And one more item they didn't know existed, a signed statement from Margaret's former business partner, confirming that she'd intended the Lisbon property for Sophie alone, not Daniel. Not Laura, Sophie. The next morning I took the long way to the post office, driving past Daniel's place. His shiny new SUV was gone, but Laura's car sat in the driveway. The curtains in the front window twitched as I passed. At the post office, I mailed 2 certified packages, one to my attorney, one to the trustee in Lisbon. Both contained copies of the folder's contents. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. That evening, the phone rang again. Daniel this time. I let it go to voicemail. His voice came through, low and deliberate. You think this is over, but it's not. We're going to get what's ours, Dad. One way or another. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, listening to the message twice before deleting it. The calm in his tone told me he believed every word, but what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that every step he took now was walking him straight into the corner I'd built for him. 3 mornings later, I found a bright yellow envelope wedged between the front door and the frame. It wasn't mailed, it had been hand-delivered. Inside was a formal notice from a law firm I didn't recognize, full of stiff language about mental competence and protective guardianship. They were moving to have me declared unfit to manage my own affairs. I set the papers down on the kitchen table, the steam from my coffee curling lazily over the top page. I'd seen this tactic before. Strip a man of his rights on paper, and you can strip him of everything else without lifting a finger. Joyce was at my door before noon, holding a copy of the same notice. "Daniel's bragging about it," she said, her eyes sharp. "Told half the cafe this morning that the court will side with him because you're too sentimental to see reason." I gave a slow nod. "Good. Let him believe it," she frowned. "Good? This is serious, you know." "I know," I said, reaching for the black folder on my desk. "And it's exactly the push I needed." That afternoon, I met Peter in his office. The man looked like he'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. "We'll file a response," he said, sliding my documents across the desk. "And we'll do it in a way that puts them on record, admitting they're after the Lisbon property. That's all the judge will need." We worked until dusk, drafting statements, compiling evidence, and assembling a timeline so airtight it could have been carved in stone. Every page we added was another brick in the wall closing in on Daniel and Laura. By the time I left, the street lamps had flickered on. The city was settling into its evening rhythm. Cars idling at lights, shopkeepers flipping their signs to closed. But inside me, something was wide awake, sharper than it had been in years. That night, I sat at the dining room table with the legal notice beside me. I imagined Daniel's face when the court turned his own petition into the rope that would hang his case. I imagined Laura watching her husband's confidence crumble in real time. The thought didn't make me smile. Not yet. It was too soon for that. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Sophie. "How would you feel about spending a summer in Lisbon?" I asked. There was a pause, then her voice warmed. "With you? I'd love that." I hung up knowing that by the time summer came, Daniel and Laura would be standing in the ruins of their own making, and I'd be halfway across the ocean, far from the reach of their games. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. I arrived early, wearing a navy suit that hadn't seen the light of day since Margaret's memorial. The courthouse hall smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, the kind of place where words weighed more than muscle. Daniel and Laura walked in together, dressed as if for a photo shoot. He had that smug half-smile plastered on, and she was in pearls, clutching a leather folder. They didn't look at me, not directly. Instead, they whispered to each other, confident that this was the day they'd take everything. When the judge called the case, Daniel's lawyer launched into his performance. "My client is deeply concerned about his father's mental well-being. He believes Mr. Caldwell," he gestured toward me, "is no longer capable of managing significant assets and is at risk of making decisions against his own best interest." I kept my face still, my hands folded. Then it was Peter's turn. He stood, calm as a man reading a grocery list. "Your Honor, the petition before you is not about concern. It is about control. My client is in full possession of his faculties, and we have proof that this guardianship request is merely a means to seize a property in Lisbon, one that was never meant for the petitioners." Peter handed the clerk a thick binder. Inside were copies of Margaret's signed statement, the trust documents, the Lisbon deed, and even the letter Daniel had sent boasting about getting what's ours. The judge flipped through the pages, his brow tightening. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, looking at me, "do you wish to speak?" I stood slowly. "Your Honor, I buried my wife not long ago. She left me 2 houses, one here, one overseas. The overseas property was meant for my granddaughter, Sophie. I didn't tell my son because I knew what he'd do. And here we are. This petition isn't about my health, it's about greed." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the turning of the judge's pen in his hand. Then he leaned forward. "Petition denied," he said firmly, "and I will be referring this matter for review. If I were you, Mr. Caldwell, I'd consider who I trust moving forward." Daniel's lawyer went pale. Laura's lips parted, but no sound came out. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a clean blue. Peter clapped me on the shoulder. "They'll lick their wounds for a while, but they won't try this again." That evening, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch. The Lisbon tickets were tucked inside my passport upstairs. Sophie would meet me there in 3 months, and together we'd start a chapter that had nothing to do with courtroom battles or family betrayals. As for Daniel and Laura, they were left with the same thing they'd tried to give me, nothing. And the best part, I didn't have to lift a finger in anger. I just let them dig their own hole and step right in.